Shut up and sit down.
Hi guys, I'm Dodge, this is Bigmeks Workshop and Paint Studio, and this is the remastered version of the Gorkanaut. I've taken all three parts of the Gorkanaut video and put them into one long one so you can see it back to back, and I've edited it up and sharpened up the image a bit just to make a better quality video really, because this will be getting released in October, and already had all the footage but thought it needed a bit more work doing to it. So what we've done here is we've built the Gorkanaut in subsections. I've done a Vallejo black primer, and I've already done the dark rust by model colour, no, Panzer Aces, sorry, and now I'm spraying over it with a light rust. Just in patches, you want to scatter this around, and then after that we're going to use a Doombolt brown by Games Workshop and just add more patches in. You want all the different variations of these colours showing through this, so that when we use chipping fluid later on, we can chip that off and there's going to be an uneven rust colour all the way around it, and that's going to add a lot of extra detail in all the chipping, rather than the chipping just being one solid colour. You want to make sure you get all the area here. You don't really want any black showing through. Next is the most important colour of this. It's Filthy Brown by Game Colour, and most of the model is done with this. I mean, that's the staple for this entire paint job. It's watered down quite thin, and I'm putting it on in lots of layers, but before putting this layer on I did put down a varnish, and then I put down some AK Interactive heavy chipping fluid, which we have a tutorial for, and I'll post a link in the description. Once you've got a nice even coatage of that, you want to start switching to Burnt Umber by Model Air, because that's like the Agrax Earth shade of the Model Air range. It's perfect for blending or toning any yellows. It also looks quite rusty when put on thin. So I've watered that down considerably with a lot of water, and I'm just building that up and spraying into the recesses. Don't have to be too careful about your overspray there, as long as you get a good coatage. Now at this point, Andy's light went on his desk, so he borrowed one of mine while shooting another video. It's why it's got a bit darker. But as you can see, that burnt umber's gone all the way around. It's added a lovely layer of a warm orangey rust colour. Now what we're going to do before we go any further is get a toothbrush and add a little bit of water to the bristles. And what we're going to do is keep poking away at the paint job, and the chipping fluid will start reacting with the water, making it really easy to just chip off little bits of paint here and there. Now you will spread pigment around while doing this, so keep something dry around so you can dab those bits of pigment off that are spread onto the parts you don't want. Although they do really work well close to the edges, it starts to highlight the chip before you even start a paint job really. I'm just using my finger there to dab off the parts. You can get a lot of different results with this chipping fluid using different tools to chip it off. And you don't want to go over the top with the chipping as well. I decided to go for small chips here and there and just spread them out. As you can see, I'm using different tools to get slightly different effects. And you want your chipping where the model's going to get bashed the most. Now, before we even start the metallic work, you want to put down a nice black primer again, which is usually Vallejo black primer for us. Goes on nice and smooth most of the time. It is a bit lumpy in places there, but the problem was when I did this, it was summer and the paint was drying under my lamp. But we're going to coat anything that's going to be metallic needs to be black now, and this is going to take a considerable amount of time. Be careful with your brush, make sure you don't hit anything that you don't want to when you're pulling your brush back, which can happen if you leave a black streak down there. You probably have to go over it at that step or chip it off. Now we're going to move to Warp Block Bronze by Games Workshop for the skull plate on the front of the Gorkanaut. I did glue my doors shut at this point because I couldn't be bothered to have them opening while I was painting. I'm also going to do the pistons with Warp Block Bronze as well, but only the tops of the pistons. We're going to leave the moving parts, they're going to be silver later on. Now this silver looks very luminous, it won't when it's finished. This is liquid silver by Vallejo. You can't mix this with water, you have to use surgical spirit which you can get from Superdrug or Boots if you're in England. I don't know if you're somewhere abroad where you get this from, but it needs to be about 99% proof alcohol volume, because if you put water in this, it will actually rust because it's real metal pigments. Then to start toning that down, we're going to give it a nice solid coat of null oil. And I should have probably put that on in 2 layers thinking about it, but the end result I got was alright, because I'm going to go over it with more burnt umber and more effects later on. So this is just to tone down that brightness of all the silvers. Now moving back to the faceplate, which really didn't take much work at all, and we're going to use gunmetal grey as the highlight for that. I'm just using a Games Workshop brush here, just gently dusting over the faceplate to bring out all those dints. And it works quite well and gives a nice effect, rather than it being a solid colour. Now switching back to the burnt umber, this is to add the same sort of rust effect to the metallic parts that we've been doing. I've got my PSI set really low, and I've got my burnt umber really watered down. And if you're unsure, you just want to do this in several layers, like really thin layers. But once I start toning it with this, it really starts to come together. Now it's starting to look very orky and very rusty. Now oily steel by Model Colour is what I'm going to use to start dry brushing just over the parts where the rust wouldn't sit, all the parts that are moving or get hit all the time. So that's all the bolts, rivets, nuts. We're just going to gently overbrush those back and forth to really start bringing out those edges. And there's a lot of these to do. Just be really careful you don't put too much paint on that brush. And if you do, you can always go back over it with a burnt umber again or another wash and tone it back together. Now this arm took about 3 days of work altogether. Now this is the Tamiya masking tape, and the white tape is just regular masking tape, but that's attached to the Tamiya tape so I don't pull anything off. Now we're going to start the checker pattern with a Baneblade Brown by Games Workshop. We're going to quite evenly spray that over the top because that's just the base coat. Then we're going to use Baneblade Brown plus a little bit of dark rust and start shading the underneath. And I think this colour blended together with the sort of 50-50 mix gives a nice transition. Sort of looks dirty as well as being shaded at the same time. We will be using this technique on some other parts of the model as well. After that we're going to use just a small amount of Rakarth flesh, and we're going to use that to start painting a highlighted line across the side where the light would catch. At this point I hadn't quite decided what position I was going to put the arm in, so I just went for a straight line down the middle so it'd give that cylinder shape a bit more shape to it. After that's set fully, I decided it was time to start pulling off the little checks using just a hobby knife. What I didn't realise is it would slowly pull off some of the chipping fluid, which was a bit of a pain, but it didn't really mess up the paint job too much. Because once you're done you can easily just chip away at things so it looks uneven, which it's supposed to anyway. Now what I've done, I don't think I'm just spraying over that with black, I've put the little checks back on, but I've moved them along one so they're protecting the same pieces. Now I'm going to paint the brown underneath, I'm going to paint all that black again. Don't forget to put the checks back on because you'll have to start that all over again. And then we're going to add a line of wolf grey to start highlighting, the same area where I did the white light of Rakarth flesh before. So that way you'll have that pattern go from the blacks and the lights, and it should have a beam of light all the way across it, or at least the same sort of highlight in the same area. And once you start peeling that off, I'm quite chuffed with the results, or was quite chuffed with the results for this one. And that's pretty nice and neat. Anything that I don't like I can easily go over with a brush and some water, because at this point I've not varnished anything down to protect it, so I can still use the chipping fluid to work on this. The knee has been done in the exact same fashion as everything else, but what I'm showing you here is because it's a Bad Moon vehicle, I'm going to put some of the swiggly black flame lines on. And how I did this was mark off at the bottom of the pattern where I wanted the pattern to end, and then just start working a shape from the top back down using a Winsor Newton series 7, 000 and 00 and switching those up. The shoulder pad, that was done in the same fashion, same colour scheme, and the skull was also done in the same fashion, but we're going to make some slight changes to those later on. We don't want anything looking too uniform. As you can see, I've stuck that on, but beforehand I've given it a little bit of a airbrush of burnt umber. And I just wanted to do the face that colour because there's so much yellow on this model and it's so overpowering that it needed something to break it up. And at this point I've decided that Warp Bronze is going to be a very staple colour for this and part of the palette. And we're just going to use it to start breaking up all the metallics. So if it's not silver, it's probably going to be Warp Bronze, although there are some other metallic colours I'm going to start adding in a sec. So the springs, because I couldn't just keep doing Warp Bronze, I wanted a rusty old spring sort of look, but I wanted it to be highlighted right, so I started with a hammered copper by Model Colour, and then what I'm putting on now is the bright brass by Model Colour, and just overbrushing ever so slightly the raised areas of those springs. I'm just using a really fine brush there. There's not actually that many springs to do, I think it was mainly on this arm, but any that you fancy doing, this was a good colour for it. We're then using washers, and we're using Reclon Flesh Shade watered down a lot with Lamiate Medium. I think it gets 2 coats of the Reclon Flesh Shade. I'm basically overbrushing that and letting it sit in the recesses to add more depth. And that's just going to tone it ever so slightly more red, giving it a more warm look. Because we've got our warm look with all the yellows and all the Warp Block bronzers, and then we've got our cold colours like our cold steel. After that we're going to use an Agrax Shade wash, really watered down, because I wasn't quite happy with the amount of depth in it, it still looks a bit clean. So we're going to start painting those into the recesses, and after that I was sort of happy with the result that we had. It fitted the rest of the model and looked about right. Just being really careful not to overdo it and tone it too brown, we still want those reddish colours showing through. Now the horns, we did something similar to this on the old Screamer videos, and we're using Dryad Bark by Games Workshop as the base coat. You want to get a nice even base coat of that because you want this thing to look as smooth as possible, because that's going to help later on when we do the really smooth transition over the top. This was when I really started working on the horns. I really thought this technique's a decent one, it's worth having in the video. See, all I'm doing, if you're not very good at horns, is painting a rough line. This does not have to be neat at all, it's just sandry dust. Painting it thin from the bottom to the top. Doesn't matter if you're not even good at this, because you can just go back in like there with the Dryad Bark, going back the other way, and blend all that back in. Even then it still doesn't have to be that neat, because we're going to be airbrushing it and building it up over the top, so this barely shows through. But what that's going to do is add several layers of transition to it and make it look really natural. As you can see, I'm not great at painting these straight either. The next colour was a Shab T-Bone, but we're starting about halfway up that horn and just going straight to the top. And now, because you've painted the basics on, you can use that as a guideline and just follow that. It's going to be a lot easier as you get further on in this. You want it thin towards the bottom, and you want to blend that so it's nice and vibrant towards the top. I'm just going back and forth over this, it's really not that difficult. Then what we're going to do is use the airbrush, and we're just going to airbrush Zandri dust really lightly over the whole top of that. And what will happen is the Ushabti bone that we did will still show through, as well as some of the Zandri dust, not only leaving lines there for you to follow for the next step, but also highlighting up ever so slightly. It still looks a bit unneat, but once we've got the all the steps on and the washers, it'll look nice and tidy. You obviously can't be doing this when you've got loads of tiny horns to do, so it's only really for big things. See, then we're going to go over the Ushabti bone we did again, with some more Ushabti bone, but it should blend even nicer now, because you're going to start a little bit further up the horn, leaving some of that transition in the background. I mean, you can carry on doing this technique as much as you want. See, what you could do here is do the Ushabti bone, then a third of the way up you could start doing Screaming Skull. And then what you do is you just do what I'm doing here and spray the Ushabti bone over the top to blend those colours together. So now you've got your Dryad bark, your Zandri dust and your Ushabti bone all transitioned in multiple steps in different positions, and you get a really nice look. And obviously this is still not finished because this was a Golden Demon project, needed a lot more work than this. But as you can see, that really starts to blend very nicely. Then we're going to add Army Painter's Strong Tone, which is basically Army Painter's version of Agrax Earthshade, except it's a little less red, it's more of a muted brown, so it's worth having in your collection. And we're going to blend all that. If it pulls at all, you want it to pull down at the very bottom, because that's where you want the darkest colours anyway, but try not to let any of it pull. You really want to do that in 2 thin coats or more using Lamiate Medium. And then I still wasn't quite happy with the colour, so I went for an Agrax Earthshade and Lamiate Medium, and that really started to tone it the way I wanted it to be toned, and really fitted in with the rest of the Gorkanaut. I could have left it at the previous step probably. It did end up a bit darker than it needed to be, but the whole Gorkanaut ends up quite dark when it's finished. Now we're going back to our Warp Block Bronze, obviously, for our metal trim. Now you could have done your Warp Block Bronze, if you wanted to, before putting those washers on and just killed 2 birds with 1 stone. Sorry about some of the footage here, this is an old video that I'm trying to re-edit back together. Yeah, just be really careful not to go over any of your work. You could probably do these when the Dryad bark's on, if you're careful with your airbrush. And what you notice when you do a Warp Block Bronze and Agrax Earthshade wash, it adds sort of a purple hue, but a very cloudy hue to the Warp Block Bronze, which is something I'm quite a big fan of when it comes to doing old vehicles and old metals. And again, this is just the Agrax Earthshade wash, making it nice and cloudy, a bit more dirty. Now the cables were simply done in gory red, and I could not find the footage for the rest of the red colours that I did, so you can assume that I took gory red and just started highlighting up with a Mephiston or Wazdaka red in several coats. I mean, you can alternate your cables. I end up doing some in greens, some in blues. You just want to pick 3 colours from your shelf and just start working with that. Now the jaw was originally painted the same way as all the checks, and I started breaking the rest of it up using the black primer by Vallejo again for the teeth. You want to get a nice smooth coat on that, but the Vallejo black primer dries really flat anyway. And then we're going to highlight that with German grey, or I have highlighted that with German grey or monocolour. If you're going to put these silver bits on that I've done on the nuts and bolts there, make sure you've done your chipping before you put your silvers on, because you will spread that silver pigment all over the place when chipping it off, and that's not something you want at all. That would really mess up your model, and then it'll start getting caught in washers that you put on. Then to add even more tone to the same jaw, we're going to start adding layers of burnt umber, just ever so slightly around the very first rust layers you can see there that we did. And that's really going to pronounce those a lot and bring them out. The black teeth looked a bit plain after being done, and since this is a Bad Moons Gorkanaut, decided to go a bit piratey and do one of the teeth in a gold. And for this we were using brass by Model Colour. Model Colour do have a decent range of silvers, but I'd prefer to use a Model Air Colour right now. Much thinner pigment, easier to spread. Then we're going to put on a wash of Agrax Earthshade in several layers, make sure we tone that right. It just adds a little bit more character to that faceplate. It's already got some good scratches and detail work. As you can see, I've started highlighting the chips on his face using the Rakarth flesh. But like I said at the beginning of the video, some of the footage was missing from the original 3 because I was trying to do a Golden Demon entry, so the video became a bit secondary. What we're working on here is the orcs, and we're using a wet palette for this, no airbrush this time. And if you don't know what a wet palette is, it's just a bit of cloth, parchment paper on it and water underneath, and it helps keep your paint wet. And we're using Cayman Green by Model Colour, and you can see how thin that is. That's going to take a lot of layers to just build up that base layer, but the benefit is you don't lose any of your details at all. Then what we're going to do is add Talon Sand by Game Colour into that same mixture, and that's just going to give a slightly yellow tone to it. And you want to start from the shaded area and brush up, but you really don't want much paint on your brush, you just want the residue that's left, and if you do it thin enough and do it right, it will pretty much dry before your eyes. And start on one arm, switch to the other arm, by the time you come back it's fully dry and ready for another layer. Lots and lots of thin coats. I think in a second I'm going to switch to a different orc from the Gorkanaut, just so you can see the muscle texture a little bit better. Couldn't really see with this one. You want to be just going over and over. I mean, that bit of footage is long, but I was trying to show you it transitioning and slowly building up. As you can see, it shows up a lot better here, and we're trying to add a little bit more Talon Sand to that mix. That's all you've got to do, and then you've got to do 3 or 4 layers, then add a little bit more of that colour in and just keep going. And you can also paint in the muscle textures and shapes on the orc by just slowly going over the same bit over and over again. And you're only really using the residue off the brush. You can see that building up on the knuckles, and it will dry a lot darker, so you'll feel like you're not getting anywhere with these, but really you are doing. You can see that how quickly that knuckle dried. It's just it darkens down and you just go over it again. The shirt was just done in Talon Sand because I wanted to stick to the same sort of palette there, sort of complement the flesh a little bit. And the Talon Sand went on a lot thicker. I was running out of time at this point when it came to Golden Demon. I needed to get things finished. We add a little bit of beige to that Talon Sand and start blending up again. The problem you have when blending a shirt like this is it's so scrumpled up, it's really hard to tell where the highlights are supposed to be and where the shadows are. I mean, some of the shadows are obvious, but where do you glaze from here? I was finding that quite difficult. Muscle texture, you know exactly where the highlight needs to be, you know where to start from, but there's so much jagged material on here it becomes quite difficult. Then we're going to just throw on Agrax Earthshade Wash onto that, as per usual, because it's Agrax Earthshade, it goes on everything. And just tone in some of those shaded areas, and also if you've got a little bit of a patchy paint job there, you can blend those two colours together a little better using just a filler. That's on quite thick. I will actually wash some of that off in a sec with my brush. Now the trousers were done in German Grey by Model Colour, which is a good starting base if you wanted to do some denim trousers or something like that. Again, this is pretty thin, but it's not as thin as the coats we were doing on the skin. This is simply a base coat, and you're not going to see much of his legs either because Oh no, it's the other guy. So you will see some of his legs because he's the guy who mans the guns. The top of the head and the leather was done in dryad bark by Games Workshop, because that's generally what I do most of my leathers as. It's a pretty rich colour when it's done, it's got a good transition to it. There's a lot of leather, so I was trying to do his hat in leather, his boots, most of his straps in the same sort of leather. If you want to tone them ever so slightly different, we can always just throw a wash on there. And the next colour is German grey plus a little bit of wolf grey, and we're going to start building that up. If you wanted to start doing this in a cross-hatch sort of technique, you could really build up some denim jeans look, but it's not what I was going for, so I do end up washing that down and working on it a bit more later on. As you can see, it starts off really light when you put it on, but when it dries, it darkens down again. And I wasn't quite happy with it, it was a bit patchy, so what I did, I did the no oil on camera, and then off camera I started touching it back up again. But I was quite happy with the result, once I got around to finishing it, that is. As you can see, that's all toned down and looks a lot dirtier. Now over the dryad bark for the leather, we're going to use Gawthor Brown watered down. And just pulling that pigment towards the edges of everything, leaving the darker part in the recesses. Not that this has a recess, it's a flat surface, so for this particular bit you have to sort of paint it in yourself. Don't let any of the pigment sit too much in the middle, pull it all to the edge. And started picking out some of the other metallic work with just good old lead felcher by Games Workshop. I didn't put too much detail into that belt buckle because he's going to be pushed right up against the Gorkanaut's gun, so you're not going to see most of that anyway. Just a couple of edge highlights I did on it with the basic Games Workshop colours, which would be a chainmail after giving it a wash. And to finish off the leathers, good old Agrax Earthshade. You can see the blending transitions on those. I do think the Gawthor Brown and Dryad Bark go really well together. I did leave the boots on these as steel toe caps just to add some more detail to it. Just something I used to forget when painting orcs. I just used to paint the boot all one colour. That's when I was a noob.
What's changed?
Shut up, Andy. Coralline Blue? I think that's how it's pronounced. Coralline Blue was used to start building in those lenses. Is it? It's Ichor? Alright, cheers. Well, it's an Ichor paint according to Andy. I wouldn't know because I don't use these blues very often. And the mouth was done in Tusker Fur, but you missed most of that because Andy was telling me what colour that was. And then we're going to use a Recklin Flesh shade. Now the reason we've painted the entire teeth as well as the rest of the mouth is when we do the teeth, you don't want any lines from where the gums start and the teeth end. And now we're going to use Rust Grey and that Coralline Blue again, mix that together and start edge highlighting and blending the goggles so it's got a sharp edge. I do apologise about the focus, I was really concentrating on what I was doing at this point. And still not happy with the skin, so started bringing it back up again with even more Talon Sand, but I'm adding a little bit of Rakarth flesh into it now to really mute the colour and bring it up to a bit of a muted green highlight. And that literally takes hours to do, just going over and over it. Hopefully I'll have some better footage of how to paint orcs soon, because I've got some knobs I've got to be doing for the rest of the month. As you can see, that's really bringing in that definition just by taking your time and doing lots of layers. Guilliman Blue Glaze by Games Workshop was then used for the put some depth and some more colour into the lenses, which I thought worked kind of nicely. Then with the teeth, we're just going to go for the Games Workshop Classic and we're going to use Zandri Dust. And just be really careful not to get this on the gums, but like I said, the reason we painted the whole thing Tusker Fur was so that it can blend together nicely and you don't need a hard line for the teeth. It will look like they're protruding from the gums when you're done. We're then going to be highlighting that with a shabty bone. And at this point, all I will end up doing off camera is just going around with whatever the base colour is and adding some Rakarth flesh and just blending over and over again, constantly. As you can see by this arm here, I'm still going at it, still adding slight tones to it. I think the only other colour left that we have footage for is the lips. They were done in Slanesh Grey, and then overall I watered down a null oil for the entire skin with Lamiate Medium, and then did a whole wash. And what that'll do is start blending the purple of the lip to the rest of the green, and also put a little bit more depth into the green. And there you have it, guys. That's one Gorkanaut painted. Took a bronze in Golden Demon 2017. Do apologise for some of the bits that are missing. The OSL on the lights, I'll put a link in the description. We do have a Necron one that shows 3 different OSL effects, so we'll be able to link you to that so you can see how that's done. And the finished result, I was quite chuffed with it. I obviously put an oil wash on everything. That's all the rivets and everything else. If you don't know what the oil wash is, check out the channel. There's more of that on there. So I hope you liked it, guys. Hit that like, hit subscribe, share with your friends, leave a comment and all that good stuff, and we will catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys.